Okay, vielen Dank, aber es fängt sehr gut an, würde ich sagen.
Thank you. Well, that's a good
Ich
start, I
möchte
must say.
erst unsere
First
Gäste
of all, I'd
vorstellen.
like to introduce our guest to you officially.
Hinten als
On the
Produzent
far side,
Paolo Del Brocco.
Paolo Del
Willkommen in
Brocco, producer. Welcome to Berlin.
Berlin. Donatella Palermo,
Next to him is Donatella
Produzentin.
Palermo, another of the producers.
Der Regisseur
The director.
Gianfranco Rosi.
Gianfranco Rosi.
Pietro Bartolo.
Pietro Bartolo.
Und der französische Koproduzent Serge Laloux.
And the French co-producer, Serge Laloux.
Also zwei, drei.
Aspetta, Roberto Cicuto.
And Roberto Cicuto,
No, Roberto
who's shy, is out there in the audience.
Roberto. E Nicola Borelli, dove? Scusa, Nicola, scusa.
And Nicola is also here with us. Let's give her a hand too.
Okay, es handelt sich, es ist sichtbar eine italienische, französische Koproduktion.
So as you can see, it's a
Ich möchte
French-Italian
daran erinnern, für Sie, dass
co-production.
vor 2
And
Jahren
for those of you who
Gianfranco
don't know,
mit
2
Sacro
years
Grado
ago,
in Venedig
Gianfranco
gewonnen hat.
won the
Und
Golden
das
Lion at Venice with
Fuocoamare
Sacro
ein
Gra.
Lied ist. Das scheint mir auch so wichtig. Ich nehme an, wir haben
And of course, Fuocoammare is a song. That's an important point to note as well. Fire at Sea is a song. So there's a lot of
Ich
you
möchte
here.
gerne die erste
But I'd
Frage
like to
stellen.
kick off, if I may, with the first question.
Ich habe gelesen, dass es ursprünglich nur um einen
Gianfranco had read that initially it was supposed to just be a 10-minute short. You were really just planning to make something very concise, and then you went to Lampedusa and discovered that 10 minutes wouldn't have been enough.
Fing alles an und ich habe auch gelesen, dass für dich bei Dokumentarfilmen hauptsächlich
I've read too
Zufälle geht,
that for you,
unerwartete
documentary
Ereignisse.
films are all
Also wie
about
funktioniert das?
coincidences,
Wie ist deine Methode? Wie
unexpected
findest du
events. So
diesen
what
Film?
happened? What was your method? How did you use that method in this film? How
Okay,
did it all
so should I
unfold?
speak in English? Yes. Okay, do it in English. English? Italiano? Ok.
Patriotti.
Tutti italiani sono.
You're Italians out there, so I'll speak Italian.
Ma, funziona, per me è fondamentale immergermi completamente nella realtà.
What's very important for me is to completely
Inizio a
immerse
scoprire dal
myself
momento in cui giro.
in the reality around me, and I start to discover exactly
All'inizio,
what that's
il primo
like when I
sopralluoghi
start
fatti, sì, è
shooting.
vero, c'è stata una richiesta da parte dell'Istituto Luce con un'idea di Carla
Istituto
Cattani
Luce
di fare un
suggested that we do this.
un,
Carlo Catani
piccolo
had the
film
idea
su
of making a
Lampedusa
brief
per
film about
mostrare
Lampedusa
al mondo
to
quello che
show
era
to the world
Lampedusa in quel
what
periodo lì.
Lampedusa was all
E quindi
about
dopo i
during
primi
that period.
sopralluoghi che feci nell'isola,
So the
mi resi
first
conto
kind
che
of
era in
location
ogni caso
scouting I did
impossibile
on the
raccontare
spot
una
made it very
realtà
clear
così
to me that it was
complessa
virtually
in un
impossible
film
to
breve.
recount
E
such a
d'altronde
complex
il
reality
mio
in a
respiro
short
è sempre
film.
a lungo termine, perché
And I also always
nel
think
modo in cui giro
in the long term, because
ho
the
bisogno
way in
proprio di
which
immergermi in quella
I shoot
realtà,
means that I really need to become
all'inizio
completely
completamente
immersed
distaccato
into
e
that reality.
senza
First of all, I'm
conoscere nulla. Io voglio
completely
sempre sapere il meno possibile
separated from
dei
that
posti che
reality.
inizio a incontrare facendo il film.
And I didn't
E
know
poi
anything
piano
very
piano
much
nell'arco del
about the
tempo,
places that I
infatti per me
encountered
è
in the course of making the film, but
fondamentale, e ringrazio i
slowly but
produttori
surely I find out
di
more
questo
about it. I'd
film
like to
per
thank the producers of this
che mi hanno
film,
dato la
actually, in
possibilità di
particular here, because they gave me a
passare tanto
chance
tempo sul luogo,
to spend a
perché non è
lot of
facile
time
per un
on the spot.
regista
It's not
dire, non sono
easy
in grado di
for a
raccontarvi il
director
film prima,
to
non
say, well, I'm
sono
sorry,
in
I
grado
can't tell you what's going to be in the film. I
assolutamente
can't
nulla
even
su
write a
questo, solo
treatment or
bisogno di tempo.
anything.
Quindi sono
All I need
veramente
is time.
pochissimi produttori che ti
There's very
concedono
few
così carta
producers who will
bianca sul
give you
progetto,
really
e soprattutto
a
sullo
blank check
spazio
in the
così
sense,
lungo
a carte
di
blanche,
tempo.
and let you
Quindi il
get
film nasce con
on with it for
un'immersione,
such a
nasce
long time. So the
il
film
primo contatto che ho
begins
avuto a
with me
Lampedusa, è
becoming
stata
completely
una persona
immersed in the
fondamentale
whole
per
thing.
me,
My
che è
first
Peppino
impression
Giuseppe del Volgo,
of Lampedusa was
che dove sta
filtered through Peppino. Peppino's here, actually. There he is, over there.
Alzati.
Missing you up here. Peppino, stand up and give us a wave. He's from Lampedusa, and through Peppino and with Peppino, I began to get to know what Lampedusa was all about. And of course, as is always the case in my work, there's encounters, I meet people, it's a little like falling in love with particular individuals, first with figures and then perhaps with protagonists in the film. Pietro Bartolo was the first person I met. Complete coincidence, I had a bronchitis when I was on Lampedusa and I met Pietro Bartolo in the hospital. He didn't know that I was a director, he didn't know I was there to make a film. We talked for 2 hours and I told him that I wasn't really sure that I was going to manage to spend enough time on Lampedusa and make the film. And he gave me a key way in through the images. He told me in a few words about what he'd experienced over those years, and he showed me the images and he said to me, I'm sure you'll be back and that you'll make the film. I returned on the 27th of December in 2014 and I started shooting. The last scene actually was with Pietro on the 13th of January of this year, when the film had already been selected for the Berlin competition, and that was the scene that you saw, where he's sitting in front of the computer monitor and telling you about how things are exactly the spark that set the film up. It was like closing a circle. I'd already edited the film and I already handed it in to the festival. I needed something extra. I needed the words of Dr. Bartolo, and that were shot on the 13th of January. We slotted that in at the very last minute, and it's now part of the film that you saw this morning. Perhaps there's some questions out in the audience.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Anne-Christine Loranger, je viens du Canada.
Anne-Christine Loranger, I'm
is
from
English
Canada.
Better for you, sir?
Yeah, English would be better.
Okay. My name is Anne-Christine Loranger, I come from Canada. You made a very, very political film without a political statement. And it seems to me that without a political statement, then the situation is no longer aimed at any country, but it's the responsibility of all of us to deal with it. Is that the case? And Dr. Bartolo, do you have something to tell us about that we should know that has not been seen or said about this situation with the refugees? What you feel should be done?
Ok, io credo che il film sia politico a prescindere. Quando
I think that the film can indeed be read politically. My films never have a direct political twist as such, but I think that this film can be said to be political. What it really is that it bears witness to a tragedy that's happening right in front of our eyes. I think that we all are responsible for that tragedy, and perhaps after the Holocaust it's one of the greatest tragedies the world has ever seen. Unfortunately, some dreadful images have shot around the world, but only very late on in the whole process that has made us aware. And now we can really become active to open our eyes. We see these people every single day. We see their fates. We're bombarded with images and with news. Politically, I think it's up to politicians to shoulder political responsibility, and that's not just the responsibility of certain countries. It's not just Europe, it's really a global responsibility. There are people who are dying to cross just a few miles from Turkey to Lesbos. It's just 7 or so kilometers. It's not really very far, and they die there. They come on these long routes, and the sea is becoming a cemetery. We see that day after day, and we don't do anything. And we are responsible for not doing anything. We're responsible for a crime, for our inaction.
Sì, rispondo io alla domanda. Effettivamente ne ho viste tante.
Oh yes, I've seen so very, very much since 91, when the first boats landed, that I saw the situation. I've seen some beautiful things, but above all I've seen really dreadful things. So many dead children, so many dead women, so many raped women, And these things really leave you with a great big empty hole in your stomach, with a dreadful feeling. And it's really awful to look at this, and often these are really nightmares that haunt me very often. I've been interviewed by almost all TV channels around the world. They come to Lampedusa to take a look at what's happening. Journalists come to Lampedusa and take a look at the phenomenon. And every time I have to talk about this, I feel dreadful, but I don't want to talk about it, but I do accept at the end of the day, because I hope, just as I hope that this film by the maestro Gianfranco Rosi will get the message across, that these newspaper articles and this film will raise people's awareness and raise the awareness of those who can do more than us to do something to solve these problems. This problem is becoming hugely dramatic. It's a really epoch-defining issue for Europe, and the countries of Europe seem to all be going their own way, doing their own thing. Some are setting up walls, some are putting people within pens, within fences, and you shouldn't even treat animals like that. And I don't think that a wall or barbed wire is going to stop these people. If we want to stop these people, then we need to act differently. We need to create positive situations in their own countries, but there's one single person in the world who wants to leave their own homeland unless they're forced to do so. So that is what we must do, and the responsibility is not just for Italy. Italy's done a great deal, I have to tell you the truth. It's not even just Europe's responsibility, it's the responsibility of the great powers, those who are pulling the strings at the global level. The tragedy that you saw in the film happened just off the course of Libya. They'd been on boats for 6 hours or so. There were 150 people down in the bottom part of the boat. They'd been stuffed in there, sitting there in the dark. Imagine that dreadful journey when you're down in the hole. People died asphyxiated. They were suffocated by the motors of those small boats, dying after 5 hours on a boat. We picked them up just 6 hours off the coast. Otherwise, everybody in the hold would have been dead. They were just at the start of their journey. All the people who were down there in the hold would have been dead, and then nobody would have been able to tell that story. I didn't read very much about it back there on the 20th of August. That really was hardly mentioned, this tragedy, in the newspapers. So the film is not just about recounting that story, it's also about telling the story of Lampedusa. I want to do that through the eyes of Samuele. He was 10 at the time when we shot the film, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about what's going on inside of him. And we realized that he was a bit like us. He was looking and not knowing what to do. The lazy eye that he has was actually a completely coincidental metaphor, but it's a very appropriate one, and unfortunately our politicians still have these lazy eyes that fail to see.
Buongiorno, sono Roberto Sapienza di My Generation Web.
I come from My Generation Web. I want to say how impressed I was by this film. Mr. Rossi, Samuele, Dr. Bartolo, you really all did a wonderful thing. Well, I said, it has political scenes through a certain prism, of course. And what you've said is very, very striking. And you haven't seen anything yet, by the way.
Non rovinategli la sorpresa.
He's got plenty more tricks up his sleeve and what he can tell you. Anyway, I wanted to say, Gianfranco Rosi, you presented this through the eyes of Samuele. How did you choose him? He's very impressive. He has an amazing screen presence. I wonder if you did screen tests or something like that, or how you met him and Dr. Bartolo. I'd like to ask you. I had the feeling that you really expressed your view of Lampedusa. I wonder if you think that Dr. Rosi really conveyed what's going on. How do the people of Lampedusa experience this dreadful period? There's also these very striking dedications, for example. You say you haven't seen the film, so you really don't know what it's about, but these dedications on the radio, does that all really happen? How true is it? Well, I'm a coincidental protagonist in the film. A coincidental figure, in a sense. When I came along to Lampedusa, apart from Boatman, my first film that I made in India, where there's this scene with children, but apart from that, I'd never worked with kids, and I wanted to. In Sacro Gra, I wanted to have some kids, but I didn't actually manage to include any. But in Lampedusa, I felt that I wanted to tell about the island through the eyes of a child. I said that to Peppino, and he introduced me straight away to Samuele. He was really the first person I met, and after 5 minutes, it was quite clear to me that he would really be perfect for the starting point of the film. There's that scene where he's playing with the slingshot, and he tried it out in front of me. And it was an absolute bullseye shot the first time he said to me, "You want passion?" And I understood when he said that to me that he would have conveyed the passion that was needed to make this film. And it was very playful with him. There was nothing that we'd premeditated. Nothing like that when shooting the scenes with him. In a sense, the film self-fertilized itself. We didn't write any script. We didn't premeditate the scenes, but over the 4 or 5, 6 months that we were making the film with, Samuele would meet up, and we'd have the camera switched on at some point or another, and I would start filming. I was working pretty much on my own. The crew was very small. There was me and Peppino, basically. So there was just a couple of us. And that created a very strong sense of intimacy and absolute freedom. So every scene came into being and then drew to a close without me even realizing it, nor indeed Samuele. But as time went by, as I kept on filming, maybe sometimes we hadn't seen each other for 3 weeks, and then we'd meet again and make another film, then we wouldn't see each other for a month, and then we'd shoot another scene. So it was a very slow journey, a slow pathway, but every time we took a step further forward towards something very concrete, very tangible. And as I shot, I realized that in a sense we're expressing his state of mind, the state of his spirit. That scene with the cactuses, it's a bit like the army that you're constructing, the war, the battle, the enemy. When he puts the duct tape around the cactus, I said, well, that's exactly what we're doing. We destroy things and then we try to put sticky plaster on, in a sense, and put everything back together. So at first I just told the story of the island, the voice of the island, and the lack of contact between the island and that world, at least apparently, because things have changed a great deal when it comes to the boats arriving. When Mare Nostrum was set up in Frontex and so on, the border moved away. In a sense, it moved away out to sea, far away from Lampedusa. The boats are intercepted before they come to Lampedusa, and you see they put the people onto the boats and bring them to Lampedusa. They go to the detention centre, the reception centre, are registered and are then taken to Sicily or elsewhere in Italy. So things have changed. Lampedusa is much more institutional now in a sense. Years ago, the boats used to end up directly in Lampedusa. So dealing with that, managing that was entirely different. And paradoxically, perhaps fewer people died because they set off knowing that they had to go across the sea for a week or so, and they would have to survive under their own steam, so to speak. But now, in Libya in particular, people are really stuffed into the boats. They're crammed into the hold, and they're set off into the sea in absolutely dreadful situations, and then somebody will rescue them. And that's the policy of intervention, stopping this smuggling of people, stopping this method of sending people out to see where death lies in wait. And maybe
he has to answer the question.
The doctor could reply as well.
Devo rispondere a quello che mi chiedeva a proposito del popolo di Lampedusa, come vive questa situazione.
You're asking about the populace of Lampedusa, the local people, and how they experience it all. Gianfranco stayed with us for more than a year amongst the local people of Lampedusa, so he became pretty well integrated. He fitted in well. They are quite extraordinary people, the people of Lampedusa. They've experienced this phenomenon as something in a way natural. They don't complain, they don't protest. They behave well. They're prepared to help people when there's a shipwreck. They'll throw themselves in the sea. The fishermen will do anything they can to save as many people as possible. They'll always give a helping hand. People have often said to me, how come Lampedusa never becomes tired of this phenomenon? Why are there no protests? And I always say, the people of Lampedusa are a people of seafarers. And fishermen, all those who come from the sea are welcome. It's really in our DNA. I could tell you all kinds of things about this side of the people of Lampedusa. For example, one time a really big boat came, 850 people on board. And they'd been at sea for 7 days, so you can imagine what kind of state they were in. 850 people on a boat, 7 days at sea. You can imagine the state they were in when they arrived. And they came to the commercial wharf with the boat there because there were so many of them. There was a woman there, a Nigerian woman, and she was right at the end of her pregnancy. She was about to come to terms. She was in dreadful state, and she had serious problems with her pregnancy. She had these strange green bruises all over her. And we took her to the hospital. When I went to see her, I realized that it would no longer be possible to get her to Palermo with a helicopter, which is what we usually do in situations like that. And so we set up a maternity ward. We just had a small bed, and we had tried to get her to give birth as rapidly as possible because the baby wasn't doing well. And I had to, in fact, do a cesarean section and take the baby out. And the little girl and her mother survived. We put them into intensive care and they survived. But in Lampedusa, just to tell you how magnificent these people are, after this birth I went out into the corridor. Nobody knew there was a woman there who was about to give birth. And when I went out into the corridor, I saw there were more than 50 women of Lampedusa, all of whom who had brought something for the kid. They brought all kinds of things, nappies and milk and everything you can imagine that a small child might want, toys as well, just to tell you what the people of Lampedusa are like. They really have big hearts, and they deserve much more than the Nobel Peace Prize.
So I have a question for the director, Gianfranco Rosi. First and foremost, it's a visually very stunning documentary, and I would like to ask you, how did you create the visuals? Because the wide shots, the images are very, very powerful. So are the faces. So how did you create it? Thank you.
Excuse me, how do I?
How do you create the visuals? How did you make them so powerful, and the faces too? That's the question.
How do I film?
Yes, indeed.
Well, paradoxically, I'm sorry, I answer in English for you. So, paradoxically, filming for me, it's. I like to film, and I like to be in the back of the camera because it's for me a way of discovering what's going to happen. I never think too much where to put the camera or the distance. This is something that happened at the moment. And immediately. What I look forward a lot is the light. For me, the light is always one of my protagonists in the film. So the condition of the light for me is essential to start filming. In fact, my perfect light is in the winter, cloudy. It looks always like very cloudy. Some people tell me that Lampedusa looks like Ireland in the film. But that's the kind of weather that I feel congenial. I'm also photophobic myself. I don't like too much light. So for me, I feel my perfect moment of filming is cloud and very little light. So this for me is a fundamental companion of my work. And I think this time also I had the privilege of using a camera which is quite light but fantastic camera. It's a Amira from Ariflex, and which made a huge difference because with this camera I was able to shoot at night literally with no light. I was shooting with a small torch, and that gave me an enormous freedom because be just one person shooting and we were only two people sometimes looks like we had an incredible amount of light in order to be able to shoot at night. And when we shoot in the middle of the forest, it was only one torch. So I think that the technology helped me a lot also on this film because be able to work with a small camera, tiny camera by myself was an incredible tool.
Haris Sigid, African Refugee News, Eritrea. I have a question for Mr. Rosi. I can also in Italian if you want. Guardando il film, perché è un film più che un documentario, perché ci sono due parti.
Looking at the film, I mean, it's very striking that it's a film a documentary film, and there's two sides to it: the ugly part and the more beautiful part. And I wanted to ask about this fisherman who goes out to catch the sea urchins and the dives down below the water. So I wanted to thank you for this documentary because it's the very first time actually that you see this tragedy as well. You can really touch it with your hands, and it's very important that people can touch that with their hands. And to the doctor, I wanted to say thank you for what you've done. I know known Italian doctors in Sudan and Eritrea who left their family at home to come and do their job, and you're at home. I guess you've neglected your family a bit. Well, yes, I neglect my family quite a lot because of all of this. But fortunately, my wife and my daughters understand. My wife is a doctor too, so she understands very well how things are.
Io ho dedicato la mia vita un po' anche a questo fenomeno perché
dedicated my life to this, not thanks to me actually. I'm in charge of the health unit, but from the very first boats arrived, I've been dealing with this. The first time the boats disembarked, I remember, back in 1990. There were three of them.
Erano tre persone di colore che sono arrivati
a Lampedusa
di notte e si sono rifugiati
in un albergo in Lampedusa at night, and they went and hid in a hotel which was being constructed, and the workmen went along and in the morning and found them there, these three boys sleeping on the ground, and of course they didn't. When they saw the workmen, they got up, and
tutti quelli che non sono bianchi a Lampedusa
people Lampedusa thought that the Turks had arrived because if you're not white
e quindi poi
in Lampedusa, they think you're Turkish, and they were welcomed, they were received. That was the first disembarkment, and since then there's been more and more boats, more and more numbers going up all the time, and very often we found ourselves dealing with really dramatic situations.
L'ultimo è stato quello del 3 di ottobre.
And the last was the one dated the 3rd of October. I'm sure you remember that dreadful catastrophe. They were 200 meters off the coast. There they were. And for some stupid reason, a really stupid reason, that boat tipped over.
E 560 persone sono finite a mare, di cui
and over 500 people ended up in the water.
Non 66, perché spesso dicono 366. In realtà
people died.
Li ho visti uno per uno.
I saw them one by one, so I know the exact precise figure. The figures you usually see in the papers are not quite spot on.
Perché uno o due non sono un numero, sono due persone.
Doesn't mean that's one or two just numbers, it's actual people. And there were so many children amongst those who died, so many children. And I remember I was already at work. There had been 2 large disembarkments of Syrians at night, around nearly 1,000 actually. And then at 7 in the morning I got a phone call, and it was the people at the port saying, come down here straight away, something dreadful has happened. There's been an absolutely shocking shipwreck with so many people dead. Well, I said, well, I'm already here. let's wait till they arrive and let's see what happened. I didn't imagine for a moment there'd be so many people dead, so many. And it was actually a fisherman's boat from Lampedusa that was the first to act, and they arrived. Domenico was in charge, he was the captain, and he was crying when he came in, and there were 20 people on the boat. They were alive, but they felt awful. They'd swallowed water and seawater, and they'd swallowed diesel fuel as well, because they were all absolutely drenched in diesel fuel. And at the prow of the boat, there were 4 corpses, and the fireman went on board to put them into the body bags. And I said, wait a minute, let me look, let's see, let me check them. And 3 of them were definitely dead, but the 4th one was a girl, a young girl. And when I was talking to the commandant, he was telling me what was going on, I thought that I felt her pulse going, and I said, wait a minute, she's still alive. And so I got Domenico, the Comandante, the head of the boat, to take care of me. We put her into the ambulance, took her to the first aid, and it took 20 minutes to bring her fully back to life, and after 20 minutes she came back to life. Gebrat is her name. I never saw her again. And I was absolutely delighted at that moment to have been able to save a human life, to save a woman. And after that, all I saw was so many dead people. So many. And straight afterwards, the boats came with the body bags, and we knew that there were so many children amongst them. They told me that. They'd warned me. And when I had to start inspecting the corpses, I do all of them, unfortunately. And I hope that in the first one there wasn't a child. And I opened the first one, and it was a really small child. A little tiny one. And I remember it with great suffering, because having rescued that one woman, I hope that I'd be able to perhaps deal with some people who were alive, and I listened and listened to hear if the heart was beating, if there was any pulse, but there was nothing to do for any of them. So those are the things that I've seen. And I hope that when you hear these things, when you hear these testimonies, you can really realize what is happening, what is going on, and do something to put an end to this tragic and shameful page in the history of humanity.
Gianfranco, vuoi aggiungere qualcosa sull'episodio
Gianfranco, do you want to add something about fishing for sea urchins? Well, that was also a coincidence, an encounter on the island. And he was supposed to actually play a greater role, but it was hard to go into that in more detail because we changed things around a little bit. When you make a film, sometimes you don't understand why you've put them in exactly. You don't have a rational reason or an overthought reason. But in a sense, he represents the water. It's as if this island was floating. He goes into the twists and twirls of the water. But the sea for him is just the fish, but if you look at it metaphorically, he's somebody who has no contact at all with that world. In a sense, he's the metaphor of the film, those who don't want to see what's really going on, surrounded by the sights and the sounds, realizing that the sea can be an element of death as well, but it's something which that fisherman deals with every day, clambering down the cliffs, diving down into the water, come wind or high weather, and perhaps that's a metaphor in a sense of the world that doesn't want to look straight at what's going on and what's happening outside of the water. In a sense, it's hard for me to rationalize it afterwards with hindsight, but I think he was a really essential element of the film. There's a sense of adding a breathing space, a moment to stop and reflect and contemplate. It was just 10 days ago when we were still editing the film, so perhaps I haven't had time to really digest it fully for myself, but I know that those images and those moments in the film are essential. Unfortunately, it seems we've come to the end of this press conference. I wanted actually to have Jacopo Quadri up here with me as well. He's the editor.
Jacopo
edited the film.
Ha montato il film a Lampedusa.
In Lampedusa. It was very important for me that Jacopo should come here. And it was also very important that he went to Lampedusa so that during the editing he was in contact with the island. I said it was a kind of method editing, full immersion into the work. And he was in Lampedusa. We were doing the shooting and the editing. It was possible for him to actually meet the people and to really breathe the air and the spirit of the island. That was vital for us. And also somebody who's not paying attention, Fabrizio.
Fabrizio è molto stanco.
Fabrizio is exhausted.
No. Ma Fabrizio ha dormito 24 ore in queste ultime 2 settimane.
He spent about 24 hours in the last fortnight because he's really been working his little socks off to get the film to the festival. I kept on shooting and adding more and more material. He said, hang on, we've got to stop at some point, sooner or later. But he dealt with everything as the production manager, and he was very, very involved in the whole thing right from the very start of shooting. Dario Zonta, who's also involved right from the outset. He was always involved and had always had a critical gaze, helping us to move ahead. And Peppo, I really introduced you at the beginning. He was our guide. No, not Peppino, Pippo I meant. Pippo, stand up.
And
he gave me the strength to survive at Lampedusa. I put 10 kilos on, I have to say, thanks to the families around me. And also our composer, who also wrote Fuocoammare, Fire at Sea, the song that was written by his grandfather. The words got lost along the way and he rewrote it. So it's a piece of music that recounts a tragedy that happened during the Second World War. A boat called the Magdalena. It was bombed by the British, as a matter of fact. And it was quite remarkable because the song was very light-hearted in the sound of it, and that, in a sense, is the spirit of the island. There's tragedy, but there's rebirth as well. And there's a sense of distance as well through that light-heartedness. I'm really sorry I have to interrupt you because we've got other press conferences waiting, so thank you very much.